Imagine being outnumbered 4-1, while the temperature drops to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and instead of shelter, you are told tents will only get you killed. At the Chosin Reservoir, more American soldiers fell to cold than to bullets, over 7,300 frostbite casualties in just 17 days. Why did military planners send entire divisions into a Siberian deep freeze with the wrong gear? And what desperate choices did survival demand? The nightmare began with a single unthinkable logistical mistake. Winds swept down from Siberia, turning the Taibak Mountains into a natural freezer. The regimental thermometer at Chosin Reservoir dropped to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit at night, with wind chills close to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Every breath burned in the throat. Frost formed on eyebrows and rifle barrels within minutes. For the 30,000 American troops trapped at Chosin, these temperatures were not just uncomfortable, they were lethal. Surrounding them were 120,000 Chinese soldiers, outnumbering the Americans 4-1. But in those 17 days, it was the cold that did most of the killing. Canvas tents, standard issue for field armies, became useless. When heated from inside, they lit up like beacons against the snow, drawing Chinese mortar fire with deadly accuracy. Commanders ordered tents abandoned or destroyed, forcing the men into the open. There was nowhere to hide from the cold. The ground, frozen solid, refused even a shallow foxhole without explosives. Night after night, soldiers lay exposed on the ice, their only protection the layers on their backs and the bodies beside them. Casualty reports tell the story in numbers. The 1st Marine Division logged 7,313 cases of frostbite and cold injury, more than the 4,418 battle wounds recorded in the same period. In some rifle companies, half the men lost the use of their hands or feet. At any given moment, 1/10 of the fighting force was too frozen to move, let alone fire a weapon. The scale of suffering was so vast that for every 2 men hit by bullets, 3 more fell to the cold. In the battle for survival, nature proved deadlier than any enemy. American quartermasters, expecting a brief campaign, issued gear meant for European winters. The M1943 field jacket, standard across the lines, offered little defense against Siberian winds. Its thin wool lining and cotton shell trapped moisture and let the cold cut straight through. Underneath, men wore whatever layers they could scrounge. Wool shirts, sweaters, sometimes even newspapers tucked between shirts for extra insulation. But no amount of improvisation could bridge the gap when the mercury dropped to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Sleeping bags provided another false sense of security. The mountain sleeping bag, rated between 0 and 14 degrees Fahrenheit, was the best available. In the Chosin night, that left soldiers 40 degrees short of safety. Many bags froze stiff, their zippers locking up, trapping men inside or forcing them to sleep on top, exposed. Boots were no better. Leather uppers and rubber soles conducted cold directly into feet. Shoe-pack boots designed to keep water out instead trapped sweat, which then froze. By the second week, frostbite had become as common as hunger. On November 27th, the Chinese offensive snapped the last supply road. Convoys carrying winter parkas and Arctic sleeping bags never arrived. Ammunition, food, and fuel ran low, with tents abandoned to avoid mortar fire. There was no hope of resupply or retreat. Every night, men faced the cold with what they had on their backs and whatever they could salvage from the frozen dead. Improvisation was no longer a choice. It was the only way to survive until daylight. Survival in the open demanded a kind of discipline that went beyond orders. Marines and soldiers formed tight huddles, pressed together in the dark, their bodies the only barrier against the cold. The spoon formation became standard. 4 to 6 men curled on their sides, each pressed into the back of the next. The outermost men, exposed to the wind, rotated every hour, called in by squad leaders or more often by the Marine corpsmen who kept watch for signs of frostbite. It was a system born of necessity, and if anyone stayed on the edge too long, they risked losing fingers, toes, or worse. Beneath them, pine boughs scavenged from the few available trees provided a thin pad against the frozen ground, trapping pockets of air for insulation. When parachute material or shelter halves could be found, these were layered beneath or over the group as a crude attempt to cut the wind. Every item of clothing was worn at once: wool shirts, sweaters, extra socks, even scraps of newspaper, stuffed between layers to hold in warmth. Boots left outside froze solid and became useless by morning. Men learned to pull them off and tuck them into their sleeping bags, pressed against their chests or bellies, using precious body heat to keep the leather pliable. Water for drinking or melting snow was another challenge. Canteens froze within minutes if left exposed. Many men resorted to melting snow in their helmets over small fires, fueled by whatever could be burned. Wooden ammo crates, scraps of rubber, even ration wrappers. Every night became a contest between exhaustion and the cold. The only certainty was that no one could survive alone. The spoon huddle, the boot-in-bag ritual, and strict rotation schedules became the difference between waking up in the morning or not waking at all. Metal, rubber, and flesh all reached their breaking points in the chosen cold. Rifle bolts seized as condensation froze inside the chambers. The M1 Garand, the backbone of American firepower, became unreliable. Firing pins snapped with a brittle crack, sometimes on the first trigger pull. Machine gun crews struggled with weapons that refused to cycle. Lubricants thickened into sludge and locked moving parts solid. Cleaning rods and hammers became as essential as ammunition. Some men slept with rifle parts inside their jackets, desperate to keep steel warm enough to function at dawn. Vehicles fared no better. Engine oil thickened overnight. Batteries lost their charge in hours, and any truck or jeep left off for more than a few minutes risked permanent damage. Engine blocks split open as coolant froze. To keep ambulances and supply trucks running, drivers took turns nursing engines through the night, burning precious fuel just to prevent mechanical death. The roar of idling engines became a lifeline. Each gallon burned was one less for the long retreat. Medical supplies joined the casualty list. Morphine syrettes froze solid in medic kits, useless for treating wounds or easing pain. Medics learned to keep them in their armpits or even their mouths, hoping body heat would thaw the precious medicine. Blood plasma, meant for transfusions, turned into blocks of ice. Sea rations froze so hard that men chipped at cans with bayonets, then tucked them inside their clothes for hours before they could eat. In this environment, the limits of American technology were exposed not by enemy fire, but by the relentless cold. Field hospitals at Chosin filled with men whose bodies had reached their limits. Surgeons worked by lantern light, amputating frozen fingers and toes in rows of cots. Sometimes dozens of operations in a single day. The most common wounds were not from shrapnel, but from the cold itself. Flesh turned black, boots cut away from swollen feet, hands locked in a permanent grip around rifle stocks. Army medical studies later found that 1/3 of all casualties came from cold injuries alone. Among the hardest hit was the 31st Regimental Combat Team, known as Task Force Faith. Out of more than 3,000 men, fewer than 1,000 made it out, many carried by their comrades, with hundreds lost to exposure. Medics and survivors described a strange silence settling over the living. Men would sit down in the snow and simply refuse to move, a condition doctors called cold apathy. No orders or pleading could reach them. Sometimes only a slap or a shouted curse could jolt a man back from the edge. The lessons of Chosin changed American military doctrine overnight. Quartermasters studied every frostbitten hand and amputated foot, designing the M1951 parka to seal out wind and trap warmth. New vapor barrier boots, nicknamed Mickey Mouse, stopped sweat from freezing against the skin and broke the cycle that had crippled so many. Warming schedules became standard, enforced by orders and checked by buddy teams, making heat a matter of discipline, not luck. In Washington, the suffering at Chosin was recognized in the highest way. The survivors were awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. General MacArthur called their breakout one of the greatest fighting retreats in history. That legacy was built not just on courage, but on hard lessons paid for in blood and bone. Today, military cold weather gear owes its existence to lessons written in frostbite and amputations at Chosin. As global deployments continue into extreme climates, survival depends on adapting faster than the elements. The cost of underestimating nature's edge remains, paid in human lives, not just statistics. What would you have endured